Good Shabbos. Shabbat Shalom. Hey. I want you to do me a favor. I want you to picture a man a grown man, who's had a rough relationship with his father. You know, wasn't always great, didn't always feel love from his father, didn't always know where he stood, but knew that he probably wasn't the apple of his father's eye. And circumstance happened and things change and this man grows and he becomes a father of his own and he has children, he has, progeny, right? So that he's got he's yichus, right? Yichus is, what? Status, right. And he thinks, he's repaired his relationship with his father. They had some tough times, as a lot of fathers and children do, parents and children actually. And his father gets old and he's on his deathbed. And he says, "Come to me, my son. Come to me." And this, he comes up, and it doesn't matter how old this man is because he's still a child to his father. And he still feels like a child to it when he's with him. And the father says, "You're my firstborn. You're unstable as water. You shall not excel anymore. You've brought disgrace." Huh? Or, "You and your brother, you two are a pair. Your weapons are tools of lawlessness. Don't let me be included in your council. Let not my being be counted as your assembly." Oh, okay. Or, "You know what? You're my favorite son, so I'm going to give you a different blessing. You're a wild ass. A wild ass by a spring, wild coats on a hillside." If you think I'm using harsh language, this is my source text. So I'm just quoting our father, Yaakov. And I call him our father because that's who we are, right? We go by the name Jews, but actually, no offense to the Kohanes and the Levies in the room, technically you're not Jews. You're not from the tribe of Judah, right? That is what Jew comes from. But that's not our first name. What is our first name? Anybody but a rabbi. Seriously, come on. What is our first name? Not Hebrew. B'nai Yisrael. The children of Israel. Right? That's who we are. Right? And that's what we live up to. Right? These people, these men who have come to their father, have to encounter somebody else's opinion of who they are. And it may be very different than their own opinion of who they are. Right? Do you remember when COVID was not a thing? There used to be these things called carnivals, right? Do you remember these? And in a lot of carnivals, they had something called a fun house, right? Yes? No? Maybe so? Right? What was inside the fun house? Mirrors, right? And they were goofy mirrors, right? You'd have like a low face or you'd be 8 feet tall or whatever, right? And you see yourself in a different way. That's actually how we see ourselves. How we see ourselves versus how other people see ourselves. Right? Here we have Reuven and Yehuda and Joseph and all of these men who have come to accomplish so much, and their father sees them very differently. And they have to live with that for the rest of their lives. We have the same thing. Hopefully, none of us have been called as unstable as water by our parents. But I joke, but I also recognize that not every relationship between parent and child is a good one. And even the best have struggles. Even the best relationship between parent and child, because here's the disappointing fact, parents aren't perfect. And so we grow up with this image of ourselves. Some of it's our own, and some of it's based on what other people see when they see us. There's a verse in the book of Isaiah, in the prophet Isaiah, who says that Israel's ears are fat and eyes glazed over. And if you think about it, what Yeshayahu is describing centuries before Freud is denial. He's describing the ability or inability of us to see ourselves for who we really are. Because those funhouse mirrors don't stay in the funhouse sometimes. Sometimes when we wake up in the morning, we still see a funhouse mirror, even though it's a regular one looking back at us. Because we don't see ourselves with our eyes. We see ourselves with our stories. We see ourselves in a distorted fashion based on everything we've experienced. There's a practice that some people do, and I want to just put it out there, where people wake up and they look at themselves in the mirror and they say, "Good morning, I love you." Imagine looking at yourself in the mirror and telling yourself, "I love you." Now, maybe that's a little too far. That might be a bridge too far for some, but let's try a little bit easier thing. When's the last time you looked at the mirror to praise instead of criticize? When's the last time you looked in a mirror for any purpose other than to fix something? We often look at ourselves as something that is missing, right? We can see a beautiful mosaic, but we notice that one tile missing. And that's what we are with ourselves. We struggle with this because, like I said, we're not just pure eyes when we look at ourselves. We're not just pure hearts. We hear things like, you're unstable, you're too wild, you're this, you're that, you don't listen, whatever it is. And that gets ingrained in our narrative. And so we practice denial. And denial, it's not just a river in Egypt. Right, I know that joke too. But it's not just I'm in denial for things that I do poorly. It's also we're in denial at times for our own goodness. Think about this. Have you ever done this? Somebody says, "Oh my God, you look great." Or, "Oh my God, it's such a pleasure being with you." And And you doubt them? And you think to yourself, well, they're just being polite. Of course they're going to say that. What we're doing is we're discounting the information we get because it doesn't fit our own self-perception. And so we struggle with this. Some of us struggle with it our whole lives. Others don't. I honestly don't know how to relate to people who are so confident in themselves. I look at my daughter who's 8 years old and I say, "Oh, you're so smart." And she says, "I know." And I say, "Oh my, if I could bottle that confidence." Here's the reason we do this. It goes back to what our name is. Who are we? We are B'nai Yisrael. We are people who wrestle. That's what Yisrael means. Yisrael, the L part, means wrestle with God. But we also wrestle with ourselves. Because that wrestling, if you look at how it starts, Vayevater Yaakov. Jacob was what? Alone. And the wrestling happens while he's alone. And we have this idea sometimes when we're alone in our quiet moments of doubt. Now, I know that I'm supposed to come up with at the end of this sermon with a fix, a quick fix. I don't have it. I don't have a fix for this. I don't have a balm for the denial in which we see ourselves. By the way, denial is different than lying, right? When you lie, I'll use I statements. When I lie, I know I'm lying. But when we're in denial, we don't even know it. When we're saying, "Oh, that person didn't really mean that I look good or they enjoyed my company," that's denial. But we don't know we're lying to ourselves. It doesn't matter if we're 8 years old or 80. We still struggle with this. I was talking to somebody who's not the youngest person in the world, who sometimes still struggle with his own worth, who still sees himself as needing to be a perfect person to have love from those around him. This is not it's not autobiographical. It's not like, "Oh, my friend." No. This is actually another person. Because the perception is warped. It's a funhouse mirror. Breshit closes with a very heartbreaking interaction between a father and his children. But he actually gets to repair it as well. Because when he sees his grandchildren, he gives them a proper blessing. What's the blessing he gives to his grandchildren, Ephraim and Manasseh? I kind of gave it away. He says to them the same thing we say to our children every Friday night. May you be like Ephraim and Manasseh. Except here's the thing. They already were. They already were Ephraim and Manasseh. It's not our children living up to them. It's them living up to ourselves. And that's what we have to do. When we look at that funhouse mirror, when we see ourselves through the stories, when we practice denial, we have to realize, I'm not supposed to be like Ephraim and Manasseh. Right? There's a famous story of Rabbi Zusia, who when he goes to heaven, he's afraid of what will happen when he goes to heaven. Not because he's going to be compared to Moshe or anybody else, but they're going to ask him in heaven, Zusia, why weren't you Zusia? So this week, I want to give you something to take home. The next time, or at some point during this week, when you look in the mirror, if you can't say the words, I love you, that's fine. But try to feel some love at the person looking back at you. Shabbat Shalom.